Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The house was too quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, but lonely. Emma stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the rain-soaked backyard, where the wind swayed the empty swing like a memory trying to come back. She wasn't used to this kind of silence. It echoed around her, brushing against the walls like a reminder that someone was missing. Her husband, David, was away on another work trip, and Luke, her teenage stepson, had locked himself in his room hours ago. Since marrying David 6 months ago and moving into their lives, Emma had done her best to find her place, to belong. But some hearts, like Luke's, had doors not so easily opened. Emma didn't blame him. She understood how strange it must be to have a new woman in the house, not quite a mother, but trying to care for him anyway. She tried to cook meals he liked, listened when he spoke, though he rarely did, and always kept the light on for him when he stayed out late. Still, their connection remained like fog on a window. There, but impossible to touch. As she stood there, cradling her mug of tea, she heard laughter from outside. It was faint, but warm, the sound of teenage voices drifting from the sidewalk. She peeked through the curtain and saw Luke's group of friends, 4 boys huddled under jackets, playfully pushing each other as they walked home from school. One of them, Mark, caught her eye. He wasn't the loudest, but something about the way he tilted his head when he laughed, like he wasn't used to it, stirred something unexpected in her chest. That's when the idea struck her. What if she invited them over? Not just to cheer Luke up, but to fill the house with life again? A simple evening with pizza, games, and laughter. Maybe it would soften the space between her and Luke. Maybe she could show him she wasn't trying to replace anyone, just trying to care. With hesitation, Emma grabbed her phone and typed a message to Luke's group. "Hey boys, thinking of ordering pizza and setting up a movie night at the house. You're all welcome. No pressure." She hit send before she could overthink it. The reply came in minutes. "That sounds awesome. We're in." She smiled, but beneath that smile was a nervous flutter she hadn't felt in years. The kind of feeling you get before something unknown begins. She quickly straightened the cushions, lit a soft vanilla candle, and made the living room feel as warm and welcoming as she could. For the first time in weeks, the house felt like it was holding its breath for something more than just another quiet night. By the time the doorbell rang, Emma's heart was beating a little faster. Luke opened the door to his friends, and the room shifted, filled suddenly with voices, movement, and the kind of light that only people bring. Emma stood back, watching them laugh and joke, and she felt something in her chest, a small warmth, maybe hope. But when her eyes landed on Mark again, and he looked back at her with a shy, almost sad smile, something deeper moved inside her. It was just a glance, a heartbeat of a moment. But sometimes, the heart knows before the mind ever does, that everything is about to change. The house, once too quiet, now hummed with warmth. Emma moved through the living room with a soft smile, placing drinks on the coffee table as Luke and his friends played a loud video game, their laughter rising and falling like music she hadn't heard in far too long. She didn't want to hover, didn't want to be the stepmom everyone noticed, so she lingered just on the edge of the room, close enough to be present, far enough to give them space. But her eyes unintentionally kept drifting to Mark. He wasn't like the others. Where the other boys shouted and teased each other, Mark was calm, observant. He laughed too, but it never reached his eyes. There was something in the way he sat. Quiet confidence, maybe. Or the weight of something he didn't know how to put down. Emma couldn't help but notice it. Or maybe, if she was honest, she couldn't help but feel drawn to it. The way he watched the others. The way he occasionally glanced at her and looked away, as if unsure if he should have looked in the first place. Their eyes met more than once, and each time, it felt like they were both caught in something invisible but real. Later, after the games were over and the pizza boxes were empty, the boys slumped into the couch cushions, half tired and half happy. Emma brought out a tray of brownies, still warm, the smell of chocolate drifting through the air like a soft memory. Mark was the only one who looked her directly in the eyes as he said thank you. There was something in that look. Not flirty, not bold but genuine, a little lost, and far too mature for someone his age. It made Emma pause. It made her feel something she wasn't ready to name. A twinge of something unspoken. A sense that this boy, this young man, saw her. Not just as Luke's stepmom, not just as the woman behind the tray of brownies, but as a person. And in that moment, when her world had been so quiet for so long, being seen felt dangerously comforting. The night wore on. One by one, the boys gathered their things and said goodbye. Luke barely acknowledged her as he followed them out, his phone already in hand. Emma stood by the door, offering soft goodbyes. When Mark stepped out, he paused and turned back to her, like he wanted to say something more. But he didn't. He just smiled, that same half-smile that looked like it carried 100 feelings beneath it. And then he was gone. Emma closed the door and leaned her back against it, her breath shaky, though she didn't know why. She reminded herself he was just a boy, a friend of her stepson. But her heart didn't respond to reason the way her mind did. Her heart was responding to the sudden warmth, the unexpected attention, and the echo of something missing in her life that had stirred for just a moment tonight. That night, in the quiet of her bedroom, as rain tapped against the window, Emma lay awake. Not because of guilt, not because of fear, but because something inside her had woken up. A part of her that had been numb for so long now felt alive. And the strange part was, it hadn't been her husband's touch, or his smile, or his love that stirred it. It had been a single look from someone who shouldn't matter, but somehow did. And though she tried to sleep, Emma couldn't stop thinking about Mark's eyes, and the way they made her feel seen, even just for a moment. She didn't know what that meant yet, but deep down, she knew the story had only just begun. The days that followed should have returned to normal. Emma told herself that, over and over, but something had shifted in the atmosphere, and no matter how she tried, she couldn't pretend otherwise. The house seemed quieter again, but now, it was a different kind of silence. Not empty, but charged, like the air before a storm. Luke had grown more distant, barely speaking unless spoken to, eyes flicking past her like she was invisible. Emma tried to reach out, asked about his day, offered to cook his favorite meals, even left little notes by his door, but the wall between them only thickened. What she didn't know, or maybe deep down, did know, was that something unspoken had begun to settle between her and Mark. During that night the boys came over. And while she tried to ignore it, to smother it with logic and guilt and common sense, the truth kept showing up in the quietest moments. In the way her heart quickened when she heard a knock at the door, or the soft flutter she felt when Mark's name came up in conversation. She didn't want this, didn't ask for it. But longing doesn't need permission. It simply arrives. One afternoon, Emma was folding laundry in the living room when there was a soft knock. She opened the door and there he was, Mark, standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes clouded with something heavy. "Luke left his charger at my place," he said, holding it out. "Figured I'd drop it off." She thanked him, trying to ignore how her voice felt too thin, too breathless. He hesitated. "You okay?" he asked gently, and the sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She nodded, but he stepped closer, eyes searching hers. "You don't look okay." And that was it. Something in her chest broke open. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But in the silence that stretched between them, Emma saw something she hadn't seen in so long. Someone noticing her. Not for what she did, not for the role she played, but for how she felt. They ended up sitting in the backyard, a soft breeze dancing between them, the sun beginning to set. She talked more than she meant to, and he listened more deeply than anyone ever had. His silence wasn't empty. It was warm, thoughtful, full of respect. And when she paused, embarrassed by how much she'd shared, he just said, "Sometimes the people who give the most are the ones hurting the most." She looked at him, really looked, and something fragile passed between them. Not a touch, not a word, but a connection too real to name. Emma knew it was dangerous. Not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. The line hadn't been crossed, but it had been seen. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That night, Emma stood by the window and watched as Mark walked away down the street, his figure growing smaller under the amber sky. She wrapped her arms around herself, her mind spinning. This was wrong. It had to be. But why did it feel more honest than anything she'd felt in years? She had a husband, a family, a life she chose. And yet, here she was, haunted by the warmth in a teenage boy's voice, the ache in his eyes, the comfort of being understood. Was it loneliness playing tricks on her? Or was it something real, something buried beneath the years of being unseen? She didn't know. All she knew was that Mark was no longer just Luke's friend. He had become something more, and that truth was starting to echo louder than she could bear. The days that followed felt like walking across thin ice. Every moment too still, every sound too loud. Emma found herself drifting through her routines, like someone watching their life from outside a window. David had returned from his business trip, bringing with him his usual warmth and charm. But Emma felt miles away from him now. She answered his questions, smiled at the right times, kissed him goodnight. But her heart was somewhere else, somewhere it shouldn't be. And no matter how many times she told herself that what had passed between her and Mark was harmless, just conversation, just understanding, she couldn't shake the memory of his voice, the softness of his eyes, or the way he made her feel like she mattered in a way she hadn't felt in years. She told herself it was loneliness, that it would fade. But it didn't. It grew, quietly, like a secret waiting to be discovered. Then, one rainy afternoon, the storm came. Luke had forgotten his sketchbook at school, and Emma offered to drive him back to pick it up. He refused, distant and irritable. Something was brewing behind his silence, something heavy. Emma asked gently if he was okay, and for the first time in weeks, he looked at her. Really looked. "You think I don't see what's going on?" he said, his voice low, bitter. She froze. "You think I didn't notice how you look at him? How he looks at you?" Her heart stopped. The room, the air, her body, everything turned still. Luke stood in the doorway, arms crossed, pain written across his face like a boy trying not to cry. "He's supposed to be my friend, Emma. You're supposed to be my family." His voice cracked on the last word. "Why did you let it get this far?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Not in what had happened, nothing physical ever had, but in what had bloomed in her heart, silently and dangerously. "I didn't mean for anything to happen," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." But Luke had already turned away, shutting the door behind him, leaving her standing in the wreckage of a decision she never consciously made. That night, the weight of it all crushed her. She stood in the hallway for what felt like hours, her hand against the wall, her heart in pieces. David didn't know. Luke wouldn't speak to her. And Mark, sweet, broken Mark, hadn't texted or called since that afternoon in the backyard. She should have felt ashamed. Maybe she did. But the deeper ache came from something else. The knowing that something beautiful, however wrong, had bloomed in a barren place inside her. A place David hadn't touched in years. A place Luke's anger had now scorched. She had tried to be a mother, a wife, a peacemaker, but she'd forgotten to be herself. And somehow, Mark had seen her before she'd remembered how to look, at her own reflection. The next morning, Emma found a note slipped under the door. No name. Just one sentence, in careful handwriting. Sometimes we fall in love with the wrong person at the right time. She folded the paper, held it to her chest, and let herself cry, not just for the mess they'd made, but for the truth that had finally surfaced. This wasn't about desire. It wasn't about right or wrong. It was about connection. Longing. The ache to be seen, and the cost of that ache when love arrives, dressed in the most impossible form. In trying to bring her family together, Emma had torn it apart. But maybe, just maybe, in that heartbreak, she had finally found the truth of who she really was.